Good afternoon. My name is Bill Stevens, and I am here today to inform you about the social and psychological effects on children who have endured a divorce. There's many well-meaning people today who are unaware of the devastating effects socially and psychologically that divorce has on children. The famous Canadian author Margaret Atwood said, "A divorce is like an amputation. You survive it, but there's less of you." And after all the research I've done, I would completely agree with what she said. There's been many scientific studies that measure the long-term effects of divorce on children, social effects specifically. One of those is by a gentleman named Dr. Fagan. He concluded this from his research. He said, children whose parents have divorced are increasingly the victims of abuse. They exhibit more health, behavioral, and emotional problems and are involved more frequently in drug abuse and have a higher rate of suicide. Wow. Children of divorced parents perform more poorly in reading, spelling, and math. They also are more likely to repeat a grade and have a higher dropout rate and lower rates of college graduation. There was also a longitudinal research report that took 48 preschoolers that came from divorced families, and then it compared them with 48 preschoolers who came from families who still had their parents together, and they came up with this. They said after 2 months, a year, and 2 years of studying them, they found this, that the kids who were from the divorced parents were less socially and cognitively mature, and they had limitations in fantasy play and were particularly notable. They were more aggressive. They had higher rates of helplessness, acting out, and non-compliant behavior. Wow, it kind of speaks for itself. Let's move on now to talk about the social effects divorce has on men, because it affects men and women differently. Men remarry more quickly than women. That's a fact. And also, men are initially more negative about divorce than women, and they devote more energy in trying to salvage the marriage than women. Let's look at some stats for women, the way divorce affects women socially. Women initiate divorce twice as often as men. 90% of divorced mothers have custody of their children. 60% of people under poverty guidelines are divorced women with children. And single mothers support up to 4 children on average on $12,200 a year. That's just amazing. Okay, so let's move on to look at some stats on how children are affected socially from divorce. It says 40% of children growing up in America today are being raised without their fathers. Of all children born to married parents this year, 50% will experience the divorce of their parents before they reach the age of 18. That means that the divorce rate in America is 1 out of 2, and that's a lot. That's wild. Also says here, most victims of child molestation come from single-parent households. Goes on to say that 70% of long-term prison inmates grew up in divorced homes. So it seems like we have an epidemic on our hands. So let's move on now to the psychological effects that divorce has on children. There's also been scientific studies in this field as well. One of the more notable ones is a guy named Chris Mean, and he did some research on the psychological effects. And he said this: after parents are divorced, their kids are more likely to withhold information from one parent to avoid punishment by the other. They become very manipulative, and the parents are caught in the middle. Kids move from one home to another more often and try to manipulate parents. And see, they cut one parent completely out of their lives, and they try to punish the other parent. Another study done, and it was in the Journal of Abnormal Child Psychology, showed that children from divorced homes suffer from antisocial personality disorder, child conduct disorder, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, way more than normal kids in non-broken homes. Kids that suffer divorce, they go through denial, abandonment, preoccupation with information, anger, hostility, depression, immaturity or hypermaturity, having to grow up too fast, They suffer blame and guilt, acting out, and all kinds of things of harmful effects. So let's look at how it affects women and men psychologically, divorce. It says here that after divorce, women experience less stress and better adjustment in general than do men. It says for men are usually confronted with greater emotional adjustment problems than women. The reasons for this are related to loss of intimacy, social connection, reduced finances, and a common interpretation of the parental role. Bottom line is this: everyone suffers from a divorce. So in conclusion, we know that I believe that marriage should be taken more seriously in America. I believe children and their futures should be thought about more by divorcing parents. And finally, I believe that divorce should always be a last resort. Thank you.